Alright, we're picking back up with Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Remember, Pseudomonas is the honey badger. It does not care. It is an opportunistic pathogen. It is a major cause of health care associated infections. It's really nasty in terms of lung infections, wound infections, especially when you're looking at thermal burns. It can sometimes cause community-acquired infections, things like skin rashes, scarring. You can get biofilms in the lungs sometimes. Signs and symptoms of these infections include chills, fever, skin lesions, shock. I want you to notice the growth on the foot and on the Petri plate here. Something that is an identifying feature of Pseudomonas is that it does grow this like fluorescent green color on nutrient agar. The other thing you need to realize is that you can tell a patient has a Pseudomonas infection because they smell like fruit. It's like this really sickly, sweet, almost rotting fruit smell. And that is usually the first indication that there's a Pseudomonas infection with the patient. Now, Pseudomonas aeruginosa is gram-negative. It is a bacillus. It does have a polar flagellum. It is found in soils and water. Now, while it's aerobic, it can respire anaerobically if nitrate is present, and it is really important in terms of biofilm formation. One of the issues with Pseudomonas is that it causes delays in healing with tissue damage, and you can end up with septic shock. It produces a number of enzymes that do some nasty stuff. Basically, they can break down cell membranes, they can stop protein synthesis, they can impair the function of cilia, both in our noses and in the respiratory epithelium. Pseudomonas is widespread in nature. It can grow most places that have moisture. Well, not only can it grow in nature where you have moisture, it can grow in soap, hand lotion, eye drops, contact lens solution, makeup, swimming pools, hot tubs, even distilled water. Now, it's actually, sorry. See, I need a cough drop even at home. It's been known to be introduced into hospitals through people bringing in like flowers. It can be found on the soles of patients' shoes. You can get it from injectable drugs. There are not a lot of microbial medications that are effective against Pseudomonas. Once an infection is established, it's very difficult to treat, especially if a biofilm forms. You try to eliminate sources of this bacteria, you remove the tissue. Basically, it depends on where the infection is. If it's on a hand or a foot, you cut it off. And if it's somewhere important, then you basically make the patient comfortable because they're probably going to die from this infection if it's serious enough. Now, we also have tetanus. The common name for tetanus is lockjaw. With lockjaw, you have difficulty swallowing, you have these issues with jaw muscle contractions, then you have these continuous, painful, uncontrollable muscle spasms. Breathing's actually going to become difficult. You actually start having abnormal heart rhythms. Because you're having these uncontrollable muscle spasms, your bones can actually break from this. Then, after a period of almost unbearable pain where you're screaming all the time, you're going to die of pneumonia or from lung damage because you're constantly puking up anything in your stomach as those muscles contract, and then it's going down your esophagus. The clenched teeth associated with tetanus is called trismus. A fixed smile is called rhisis sardonicus. Think the Joker smile, that clenched, almost painfully huge smile. That's actually a symptom of tetanus. And having an arched back with muscle spasms is called epistotonus. Now, the causative agent here is Clostridium tetani. It is anaerobic, it is gram-positive, it is a bacillus, and it does form endospores. It is not invasive, so when it colonizes a wound, it is localized to that wound. The exotoxin it produces is tetanospasmin. It is encoded via plasmids, and the issue with tetanospasmin is that it causes muscles to contract without control. This is what causes a lot of the damage and eventually death to the patient. Now, Clostridium tetani is found everywhere in dirt and dust. It can also be found in the gastrointestinal tracts of humans and some animals. Typically, it's associated with puncture wounds like stepping on a nail, splinters. However, you can also get it from like contaminated piercing and tattooing equipment, insect stings, animal bites. Typically, if you get tetanus in the developed world, you either have not been vaccinated or you've not been vaccinated in more than 10 years. When you look in the developing world, the vaccine is less available, but typically you'll see tetanus coming from improper wound care or from cutting umbilical cords with dirty knives. So you actually see a lot of neonatal tetanus in other countries. So here we have a painting and a picture of a child showing that clenched smile, those muscle spasms, that arching that is associated with tetanus. Now, we do have an injection for this to help interact with the toxin molecules if you are immune compromised. So not everyone can get the vaccine. So you do need passive immunity if you're at risk of having been infected. Typically, you try to clean wounds, you will treat with antibiotics, you give a vaccine. Here's the thing. Once you start showing signs of tetanus, like there's not a lot they can do for you. So this is why if you have puncture wounds and you haven't had a recent tetanus shot, you need to go get the tetanus shot. Because if you get the tetanus shot or antibiotics early enough, it won't progress to a serious enough infection for any of that nasty stuff to happen. We have gas gangrene. So you have to realize before the invention of antibiotics, a lot of wounded soldiers died from their wounds. So with gas gangrene, you would have severe pain, swelling, and this bloody brownish fluid leaking from the wound. It could even be frothy, like you would have gas bubbles in it. You would have the skin over the wound stretched tight, and it would have black spots. And what would be interesting is that the victim would be alert until they would suddenly become delirious and then go into a coma. There are a number of Clostridium species that can cause this. Clostridium perfringens is the most common, and it can also cause food poisoning. So what happens basically is you have a wound that has dirt and dead tissue. You do not treat the wound right away, and what's interesting is, again, Clostridium is not able to infect healthy tissue, but it can grow in poorly oxygenated and dead tissue that has no oxygen, myonecrosis. It actually produces enzymes that result in cell lysis. They also produce enzymes to break down tissues. And basically, without treatment, the toxins will diffuse into the bloodstream and will destroy red blood cells, capillaries, and other structures in the body. So you have to realize that Clostridium species are found everywhere in dirt. They can be commonly found in the feces of animals, humans, and sometimes even in the vagina of healthy women. So gas gangrene occurs when you have these neglected trauma wounds and these surgical wounds. Gas gangrene was actually a common cause of death in women who had back alley abortions before abortions were legalized in the 1970s. You can also see risk factors for this being associated with arteriosclerosis or diabetes because you're not oxygenating your tissues very well, and by having cancer. Treatment for this, you have to surgically remove all the dead and infected tissue. You need antibiotics. You need to be put in a hyperbaric chamber. Again, these are anaerobic, so if you pump oxygen into your tissues, it will actually kill the bacteria. There is no available vaccine for this.